Hi. My computer just came up and said due to poor connection. So I was like, oh, I don't know what to do. So, hello. I always start my videos off with such a bang. Last time it was turned the opposite way. Anyway, hello. My name is Chrissy Hodges. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited, as always, to be part of Mental Health on the Mighty and be a contributor every month per video. So I want to start off talking about a bit of thanks to all of you, to the community at Mental Health on the Mighty. And I had a really rough time last month. I was just struggling in my own illness and also with the death of Chester Bennington, and to be able to come on here and express that and really receive the empathy and love and compassion from people. There is such power in the words "me too," and I received that from so many people and gave myself permission to grieve and gave myself permission to be sad for a little while. And I'm still working through things. As you know, it takes a long time when it comes to mental health sometimes to get to the other end when you're in a tough time. But again, thank you. It was overwhelming for me to know that I had a community of people behind me. Hi, Chris. Today I want to talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart. As much as it's a privilege to come on here every month, I also want to be mindful of the topics that I talk about, things that are relevant to my own lived experience and the individuals that I do peer support with and I coach. So that way, I feel like if we're experiencing them, perhaps you are as well. And the goal is not to give advice, but just to let you know that you aren't alone in some of these things that maybe get masked when we're getting treatment for mental illness. I think a lot of times it's just get the symptoms under control. Symptoms, and there's so much more. It's so complex. So today I wanted to talk about trauma and how that impacts us. I'm only going to focus on trauma when it comes to mental illness and diagnosis and symptoms and in recovery. I know that it's so much more complex and deep, a deeper topic than that, but I know that if you are here, you'll be able to relate to some of the stuff I'm going to say. One of the things that I struggled with for many years, and I found this thing floating around with the clients that I work with lately, which is I'm actively working toward recovery, almost getting there, or I'm there and I still don't feel good. What's wrong? And I've thought about this a lot, and I've thought about my own experience. And I remember when I got my symptoms under control, which, as if you've watched any of my videos, you know that's what I call the medical recovery for myself. You know, it's almost like we think, well, we're going to have the red carpet of recovery rolled out for us. And ta-da! Life is going to shine a spotlight on us. And sometimes it doesn't. And that can be frustrating, and that can be hard and sad. And I experienced this in a big way when I went through a medical recovery. And here are a couple reasons why. I'm trying not to get ahead of myself. But a couple of the reasons why is my illness, and for many of us, we live with these debilitating symptoms for years and years and years until we find effective treatment. For me, it was 12 years. So I had merely been surviving. Everything else was over here. If I got good grades, awesome. If I had friends, awesome. I mean, truly, the only thing I really cared about was survival. Because to me, it was life or death. Because one of my symptoms is suicidal thoughts. So when all I could think about in those times were, if only I didn't have this horrible mental illness, life would be so wonderful. Well, then I got to a point where my symptoms were under control and life was not so wonderful. And what do a lot of us typically do is we internalize things and go, it must be my fault. And that's what I did. 14 years later, after processing and grieving all of this, I realized that the biggest factor in what I went through was trauma. And there's a couple points I want to make here with trauma. First of all, having mental illness is traumatic. It is trauma. It's suffering. And many of us want to do comparative trauma. That's what I call it, comparative trauma. Where we go, I know, but this person has it worse than me. So, it really wasn't that much of a trauma, or, but look at what this person has to go through. So I feel selfish. Are you suffering? Have you experienced something that has altered your life? Then you're experiencing trauma. And there's no shame in the game when it comes to trauma. There is no, I'm worse than you, you're worse than me. We're all in it together. And so that's why I'm so glad we're here all holding hands in that together. I'm going to tell you a quick story about comparative trauma. I was working with a gal. We both have OCD. She was in a position where she had outward compulsions. I had inward compulsions. I was in recovery, and she was spending hours and hours and hours and hours a day in the bathroom, and I was there helping give her peer support and coaching, helping her with therapy. And I remember thinking, y'all, this girl has OCD so bad, like I must be a wimp. I could barely, but this was far removed. This is like 15 years later. I was like, oh my goodness, like maybe mine wasn't so bad. And I have no room to, even think about the fact that mine was horrible and blah, blah. And one day she and I were talking about this, okay? And remember, I was thinking to myself, she has it so much worse than me. And not that it matters. I'm just talking about comparative trauma. And she said to me one time, and if she's watching, she's got to know who she is. She said to me one time, well, mine just isn't as bad because you had a suicide attempt, so yours was way worse than mine. And I was like, what? I was like, oh my God, well, don't go there just to be that bad. But it really shed some light right there that what is the point in trivializing what you're going through based on someone else? If you are suffering, you're experiencing trauma, and trauma is enough to change you and change your life. So there's that, but then there's also, the symptoms and the trauma that comes with that. But then there's also the diagnosis, y'all. It's, and this is this connects directly to stigma. If you may have heard my story already about this, but when I was diagnosed with OCD in an inpatient facility after a suicide attempt, I remember, well, at first I was like, oh, there's a reason for this. Oh my goodness. I'm not a horrible person. But then it reversed quickly. It went to, oh my gosh, I can't trust my own brain. And I don't know who I am anymore. And I'm damaged goods. It went straight to the damaged good piece. And then it was, who am I? I'm 20 years old and I've been surviving and managing this illness for 12 years. I don't even know who the hell I am now. And I was pissed. I went straight to anger and stayed there for a long time. But that in itself was trauma, because all of a sudden I had to identify myself as someone who is mentally ill. At the time, I didn't understand that so many people had mental illness and that we are normal, wonderful, lovable, compassionate individuals. I didn't know that. I was 20. I was living in the South. It was 1997. I was in an inpatient facility. That was trauma too. The other thing was, over the next decade, dealing with the emotional response, the emotional grief that I had to go through of that girl is gone. And this is one thing that I work with closely with people often in peer support and coaching, is people think, I thought, well, I have this illness now, let's just get it knocked out and I can get back to my life. I can be the person I used to be. I'm going to get back to her. And it wasn't until I realized that girl is gone. She's gone. Because trauma changes you. And clinically, it changes your brain. And what happens is, because this isn't addressed at all, or it isn't addressed a lot, I can't say at all, but it's not addressed up front, in the forefront when you're getting treatment for mental illness. People and myself were so desperate just to get it under control, just to get this life back, just to get that person back. It was amazing with me and so many people. It's like people, when they're diagnosed with a mental illness, they will go, I will do anything just to go back who I was before. Why? Even when the symptoms were horrible, just so they didn't have to identify as being mentally ill. Hello, right here. That's how I was. The trauma of all of it, the trauma of who am I now? And I'll never be that person again. That is heavy. It's a heavy burden for all of us to carry. And I feel like many of us feel really alone in that. And I want to tell you today that you're not. When we develop a mental illness, in my experience, I likened this to losing my innocence. And not in a creepy way, but if you compare it to something like abuse or a physical ailment, something that really does change your life, change how you view the world, this is what mental illness does. We underestimate the impact it has on our world view. And it's easy to turn that world view very negative. I did for 14 years, so I am not condemning anybody that's doing it. Hello, I lived that. It was simmering inside of me, the anger and the sadness and the stigma. But then there are beautiful things that can come out of it. And I want to share that with you today. I know this is going to sound really weird because here, especially in the Western society, we are very much not victim oriented, okay? So I know this. And I grew up thinking the word victim is horrible. And if you're a victim, you're just weak, blah, blah. And so I went through that 14 years before I was in emotional recovery going, I'm not a victim and I've got this under control. It wasn't until I really embraced that I was victimized by my illness that I really was able to heal, because by not saying that I was a victim of something that hijacked my brain, I wasn't acknowledging the trauma I went through. Now, I am not, by nature, an optimistic person. Anyone that knows me knows that. I am not always going to be like, oh, just look on the bright side or go for a run. At all. But what I will tell you is that even for me, on bad days, I will cry and I will say to my partner, Sean, I will tell him, I wish I didn't have this illness. I hate this illness. I wish I was anybody else. I hate this. So what I'm about to say, I wanted to preface with that, because I do not just walk around doing cartwheels, and throwing rainbows and, talking about unicorns all the time. But what I want to say is there are beautiful things that can come out of what we experience, even in the midst of the trauma. First and foremost, last month, when I was so down, I was suicidal, I was depressed, I was terrified. And the beautiful responses from you got me through. Help me see that I'm not alone and that other people are suffering and it's okay. But the biggest things that I have learned and I see in the people that I work with, the biggest thing is our connectedness all over the world. Mental illness does not discriminate. We know this. So it doesn't matter about religion, money, race, nothing. It does not matter. You will have symptoms of someone across the world that are the same. And you may believe very different things, have very different families, very different everything. But the connectedness is there. I can talk to someone. I talked to someone this morning in Sweden. Hello, if you're here. And she and I have experienced some of the same exact things. It's that connectedness we get to experience. That deep aspect of human suffering, which, yeah, it sucks. So I'm not sitting here like, yay, suffering. But it also helps us connect on a different level. Now, society will tell us this. Because you have a mental illness, you're different and you're on a different level than others. Society, that's the stigma piece of society. A lot of society won't tell us that now, but they will say, or you will hear, we are not worthy and we do not deserve things. That's what I hear a lot of times. That's like the insecurity inside of me coming out. But the truth is that we are on a different level. We can see eye to eye with people that are extremely different in every possible way from us. And that is what having a mental illness can bring us. Resiliency and empathy. Whew. Two of the biggest things that make life so much better. You may think, because I think this, so I'm just throwing it out there, that because you have a mental illness, that must mean you're weak or not as smart as other people, or oh God, how many adjectives can I throw out here? I'm channeling them from my own self. But you know what it really makes you and me? Some of the most resilient people on the planet. Resiliency is a great characteristic to have. Now, I want you to imagine what you go through every damn day. Survival, survival, survival against your brain. That, my friend, is resiliency. Especially when you have to go head to head sometimes with the world because they can't see it. Empathy. We're all programmed to be empathetic. But so many people in this world, y'all know this, like even recently in like world events, people are not likely to tap into that empathy. But there is something that shifts inside of us when our worldview shifts, when we know we're suffering from mental illness. It is, I don't have schizophrenia, but I can sit in front of someone who has schizophrenia and understand absolutely what it feels like to be terrified of your own brain. And lastly, I have notes down here, that's why I keep looking. And lastly, I have so many things I want to talk about on this topic, but it's already been 20 minutes. I could keep going for an hour though. Lastly, probably the best thing that has happened for me over all of these years are the friends that I have made. The friends that have mental illness or understand mental illness. I bet you'll agree with me when I say it certainly weeds people out. Now, that does not mean we can't be friends with people who don't get it, but there really is something about finding other people. And I have many friends over the internet that I have never met in person that I consider my best friends because they can say me too, and they get it. And they understand not only the medical piece of it, but they also understand the emotional piece of it. So those are just a few of the things that are positive about mental illness. Again, if you're just joining now, I just want you to know, again, oh, and like Margaret Sisson, who just commented, one of my best friends in the world, and we met because of mental illness. Hello, Margaret. Again, if you're just joining me right now, I am not the most optimistic person in the world. So if you are joining now, this is not a video of just like, oh, you should love mental illness. That's not what it is. But just to recap, and then I'll wrap up. Don't underestimate the trauma that you experience from the symptoms of mental illness, from a diagnosis of mental illness, from the emotion of mental illness, the grief of the person you once were from mental illness. Don't underestimate that. It's okay to be sad and to be angry and to know that many of us go through this. Many. It is just not talked about enough. But trauma can be worked through. And you can heal from trauma despite the fact that it changes your brain. You can heal from it just like you can heal from mental illness. And this platform, Mental Health on the Mighty, this proves to you there are thousands and thousands of people out there that know exactly what you're going through, that you are not alone, not to give up, because there's always hope. I hope this message fell on your ears in a way of being able to understand and recognize anything in your own journey, and that can give you that hope for today. Thank you so much again for allowing me to be a voice every month. I so much appreciate it. And again, thank you for all the encouragement last month, and I look forward to seeing you next month. If you want to know more about my journey, you could head over to chrissyhodges.com. I've put it up in the little description. And if you are in need of resources and referrals or peer support for OCD, please go to treatmentforocd.com. If you really want to know about my journey, this is my book, Pure OCD, The Invisible Side of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. Have a lovely week, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Bye.